All right, online lecture number 2. Today we're going to talk about bubble charts. They are a type of scatter plot. So everything we learn with scatter plots is going to be about the same, but we're going to add an additional value to it, and that is the size of the dot. So we're actually getting 3 numbers that we can compare in a bubble chart. We're getting the x value along the bottom, the y value. Generally, the x value predicts the y value, as we've talked about before, but we're going to add a third dimension to it, which is the size of the bubble. The why of this, bubble charts are extremely effective form of visualization, but they are very hard. There is a limited set of circumstances that they work. More often than not, they result in a big mess. More often than not, you're going to try a bubble chart and it's going to be not working at all. But I'm telling you, when they do work, man, it is something pretty great. So the how of this, we're going to do over on a screencast. So over to that. So with bubble charts, like I was just saying, we've got 3 numbers that we are going to be looking at in our scatter plot. So we need an x and a y value, and then we also need to change the size of the dot to reflect what we are creating with our data. So I've got some stuff set up here. I've gone ahead and imported Tidyverse and ggRepel. And I'm going to load up our logs data for this last, sadly cut short season. So I'll load it up. I'm going to steal some code from chapter 18, which you should do. You'll need for the assignment. This is just copied straight out of the book, and what it does is it creates a data frame called win-loss logs, and it just turns any result in the W_L column that says W in it, makes it a 1, and a loss is 0, and that way we can sum up this column win-loss and get the total number of wins. I mean, I suppose I could just call this wins, but that'll be different from what I've done, so I'll just call this win-loss. I run that. So let's continue down our path of, is Hoiberg ball onto something here? Is his style of basketball of shooting a ton of threes really the way to go? So we want to look at win-loss logs, and we're going to create a couple of aggregates here. So we're going to group by each game by the conference and the team. And then I'm going to summarize these things, and I'm going to create my 3 numbers here. So I'm going to do wins, and I'm going to sum win-loss, and then I'm going to, we shot a lot of threes, we didn't make a lot of threes, so let's look at that. Team 3-point attempts, and let's just do a points. Oops, I've got sums. I just realized. Let's get rid of sum, and we'll make this one sum team score. So that'll give us 3 numbers to go along with conference and team, and that is first the number of wins, the number of threes that a team took, and the number of points. And so if I run this, I should get what I expect. Here is the conference, here is the team, here's the number of wins, here's the number of threes, and here's the number of points. So the Davidson Wildcats of the Atlantic 10 Conference, or the A10 Conference, I think it's the Atlantic 10, I'm not 100% sure now I say that. 16 wins, 741 3-point attempts, and they scored 2,182 points in the course of the season. So that looks pretty good. So let's just call this bubble, and we'll go ahead and run it. And now I can start with just a basic scatter plot. So I'm going to change my data to bubble. And my x value, which I think is predictive, is going to be that. And I'm going to make my y value points. And so when I run this, there's my data. So there's all 353 basketball teams in college basketball based on the number of three-point attempts that they made. You can see a sort of slightly rise to the right here, but it's not exactly the tightest, and we can do a geom smooth, and we'll do method equals LM, and it doesn't need an aesthetic, so well, let's just drop in my aesthetic from there, and we'll set this up, and there we go. So there's your sort of prediction line, which is sort of what you expect, that the more threes that you attempt, the more points that you're going to score. But as we have been talking about all along, does that really matter in the long run? I mean, the whole point of the game is to win, not to quote a certain football coach, but you play to win the game. So we can add another element to this by changing the size. So I'm going to change this to bubble. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab all of this and I'm going to bring it down here. I'm going to replace this. And inside my aesthetic of my first geom point, I'm going to add size equals wins. So what it should do is change the size of the bubbles to equal the number of wins. So you can see down here we have a team that didn't win very many games, didn't score many points, and didn't take many three-point shots. So yeah, not necessarily surprising there. Nebraska is going to be in this mess somewhere, and now you start to see why bubble charts are kind of difficult. Well, we can fix this a little bit by messing around with a few things. I'm going to grab that chunk of code again. I'm going to drop this in here, and I'm going to add something called scale radius onto the end. And what scale radius is going to do is it's going to change the radius of the dot, and I'm going to create this range of 1 to 10. And by doing that, now my dots go from little teeny tiny to pretty big. So whatever team this was here that scored a ton of points on not a lot of three-point attempts won a lot of games. They won 30 games. So this is obviously a good team, although probably scored a lot of points in the paint. Not a lot of three-point shots in the grand scheme of things. Teams out here winning 20-plus games, taking a ton of three-point shots, also scoring a lot of points. Down here, didn't win hardly anything at all, barely took any three-point attempts, and barely scored anything. So this is a truly terrible basketball team, whatever it is down here. Another thing that we can add to this inside or outside the aesthetic now is called alpha. And we'll make this 0.2. Alpha is transparency. So if I do this, now I can start to see that there are a lot of bubbles that overlap here in the middle versus out here in the edges, they don't really. So to make this look even better, I can, let's go back to my bubble data frame, and let's filter conference equals Big Ten. And if I did this right, and spelling conference right would help. There we go. So we got the Big Ten. So let's go ahead and make Big Ten and arrow. We'll run that. Let's grab our plot here. And let's add in, after our first geom point, let's add in another geom point, just like that. But instead of bubble, we're going to add Big Ten. And inside my aesthetic here, I'm going to add one more thing, and I'm going to add color equals team. And that should add a color for each Big Ten team in there, but as you can see right away, they're getting kind of lost because they're transparent. Well, we can just change this alpha value to maybe like 0.8. And there are your Big Ten teams a little more clear. Nebraska is almost certainly, well, that's Northwestern, so Nebraska is this one right here. We did take an awful lot of 3-point attempts throughout the season, and scored a fairly significant amount of points. What's interesting is if you follow the line here, we underperformed. We underperformed for the number of 3-point attempts that we took in terms of this linear model. So with a team that could actually hit 3-point shots, who knows? Might be a different story. So that's basic bubble charts. There's a few more things that we could add to it. We could add some labels onto these. We could change the size of this to try to mess around with a little bit more. But in terms of bubble charts, this is not terrible. There's the beginnings of a story here, but you can also see how quickly it becomes really muddled and really difficult. So check the assignment, read the chapter. There's some other stuff in there to help you out. There's some stuff in this video that will very directly help you out with the assignment. Just pay attention to the words of the question and you'll be good.